The sky was still dark when the woman carried the child down the quiet street. The little girl, no older than 4, clung to her mother's neck, drowsy and unaware. She did not question why they were walking instead of driving. She did not ask why her mother's hands trembled as she held her. When they reached an empty park, the woman set the child on a bench. She crouched down, tucking a worn-out blanket around her daughter's tiny frame. "I'll be right back, sweetheart," she whispered. The girl, still half asleep, rubbed her eyes and gave a lazy nod. "Okay, Mama." The woman hesitated, her fingers lingering on her daughter's hair. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The little girl, named Rosie, waited as the night turned into morning. She kicked her small legs, watching the sunlight creep across the pavement. She wasn't worried. Mama said she would come back. But she never did.
By the time someone found Rosie, the sun was high in the sky. A woman walking her dog stopped when she noticed the tiny figure on the bench. Rosie was curled up, still waiting. "Sweetheart," the woman said gently, "where's your mommy?" Rosie blinked up at her. "She said she'd be right back." The woman's lips pressed together. She knelt beside the bench. "How long have you been here?" Rosie shrugged. She didn't know how to tell time. The police came, and Rosie was taken to a station. She answered their questions the best she could, but she didn't know her last name. She didn't know where she lived. "She just left me," she whispered at one point, her tiny fingers gripping the blanket her mother had given her. No one came looking for her. And so, Rosie entered the system. The first foster home smelled like stale bread and dust. The couple who took her in, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, were old and quiet. They gave her a small room, a bed, and food. But they never smiled at her, never hugged her. Rosie, still so young, didn't understand why she felt so lonely. She tried to be good. She stayed quiet when Mr. Calloway watched TV, and she cleaned up her toys without being asked. But she was never wanted. One night, she overheard Mrs. Calloway talking on the phone. "She's not a bad child," she said. "But we don't love her. We thought we could, but it's just not the same." 2 weeks later, Rosie was moved to another home. And then another. And another. 4-year child Rosie was moved to another home. Some families were kind, but most were indifferent. Some saw her as a burden, some ignored her completely. Each time she packed her small bag to leave, she hoped the next home would be the one that kept her. But no one ever did. By the time Rosie was 9, she had learned not to cry when she was sent away. She was placed with the Parkers, a couple with 3 children of their own. Their house was loud and full of life, but Rosie was not truly part of it. Mrs. Parker was kind in the way one is kind to a stranger. She made sure Rosie had clothes and food but never looked at her the way she looked at her real children. One afternoon, Rosie was coloring at the kitchen table when she heard Mrs. Parker sigh. "She's a sweet girl," she said to her husband, "but I don't feel anything for her." Rosie gripped her crayon tighter. She had heard those words before. The Parkers kept her for a year before she was moved again. At 12, Rosie stopped hoping. Middle school was a battlefield, and Rosie was a ghost walking through it. She didn't make friends, didn't raise her hand in class. She sat in the back, keeping her head down. She had long since learned that being invisible was safer. At her latest foster home, the Harrisons, she was given a room in the basement. It was cold, but she didn't complain. Complaining only got her sent away faster. She was quiet, obedient, and easy to ignore. One evening, she passed the living room where Mr. and Mrs. Harrison sat with their son, Jake. They were laughing at something on the TV. Rosie paused. She wanted to sit with them. She wanted to belong. But she knew better. She turned and walked back downstairs, curling up under her thin blanket. It was easier this way. At 14, Rosie ran away. She had been in 10 foster homes by then, and each one left her feeling emptier. She decided she'd rather survive on her own than be passed around like something no one wanted. Packing a small bag, Rosie, now 14, shoves a few clothes into a backpack, heart pounding. She sneaks through the front door, vanishing into the darkness. Bus ride to nowhere. She stares out of the window as the city lights blur past. Alone in an alleyway, rain pours as Rosie huddles against a brick wall, shivering. The first night on the streets, she lays on a cold bench, exhausted but too scared to sleep. Survival on the streets, digging through a dumpster. Desperation pushes her to search for scraps behind the diner. A group of runaways teach her the unspoken rules of surviving alone. Hiding from the police, she ducks into a doorway as patrol lights flash across the alley. Cold winter nights, she huddles under newspapers, breath visible in the frigid air. First steps into the cafe, the warmth of a small cafe contrasts with the cold she carries inside. At 16, Rosie had stopped expecting kindness. But one evening, while she was sitting outside a cafe, an old woman approached her. "You look like a child who's had a hard life," she said. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a sandwich. "You look hungry." Rosie hesitated before taking it. She had learned not to trust people, but something about this woman's gentle eyes made her stomach ache in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. "What's your name?" the woman asked. Rosie swallowed a bite of her sandwich. "Rosie. A beautiful name," the woman said. "I'm Evelyn." They sat in silence for a while. For the first time in years, someone saw her. Evelyn didn't ask Rosie too many questions. She didn't demand to know where she came from or why she was alone. But she did offer her a place to stay. Rosie hesitated. She had been in so many homes that she didn't believe in the idea of forever anymore. But something about Evelyn made her want to believe. So, she stayed. And, slowly, Rosie began to heal. She still had nightmares. She still flinched at kindness. But for the first time, she wasn't alone. Lying awake in a safe bed, the first night in Evelyn's house, Rosie stares at the ceiling, waiting for it to be taken away. Morning sun through a window, Rosie wakes to the smell of breakfast, something foreign yet comforting. First meal without fear, she eats slowly, expecting the food to be snatched away. A home with no expectations, no chores demanded, no silent punishments, just space to exist. Sitting in the garden, Evelyn hums while tending to flowers, letting Rosie watch without pressure. Holding the old blanket, Rosie runs her fingers over the tattered fabric, the last thing her mother gave her. Evelyn's words of comfort: "Being abandoned says nothing about your worth." The decision to stay, Rosie could leave, but she doesn't. Visiting the park again, she stands at the bench where she was left, realizing she is no longer that lost little girl. First real birthday celebration, a single cupcake with a candle. It's the first time she's been celebrated. Holding Evelyn's hand, not because she has to, but because she wants to. Filling a room with her own things, not just a place to sleep, her own space, with pictures, books, and warmth. Standing at the bus stop, Rosie considers leaving, out of habit, but her feet won't move. At 18, Rosie stood outside Evelyn's house, looking at the sunrise. She had spent 2 years in this place, learning how to trust, how to hope. She could leave now. She was an adult, free to go anywhere. But as she turned to look back at the little house, the first place that had ever felt like home, she made her choice. She walked back inside. Because for the first time, she had something worth staying for. Throwing away the old blanket, letting go of the past, piece by piece,